Just like with any of our other joints, other synovial joints that we've worked with this weekend, if we run into a capsular end field, our treatment is going to remain the exact same as what we've been using as our mobility testing, right? So the most common one that you'll probably see is right at the radiocarpal joint, where you'll have an equal limitation of loss of flexion, extension, radial and ulnar deviation. Right, this is typically after coming out of a cast, having a fracture or something like that. You could have a wrist sprain, same sort of idea, where you actually damage some of the soft tissue around the wrist. But the idea here is to put them in the position that you need to glide the carpus, right? So flexion for a dorsal glide, and then moving more toward extension for a palmar glide. Right? Remembering here that at that joint, we're not closed packed until we get all the way into full extension. Okay? But if we have something where we say, oh, okay, you know, my hamate on my capitate, the joint in between those feels like it's a soft tissue restriction, it's a capsular end field. Mobilization is just in the direction that you need to restore. Right, pretty simple. For manipulations, these are all going to end up being whip manipulations, okay, outside of pounding your hand into a wedge. So the most common one that we're going to end up doing here is probably going to be the scaphoid on the radius. So we'll start there. Basically, if we're looking at trying to produce a dorsal movement, dorsal moment of the scaphoid on the radius, I'm going to put my index finger on the palmar side of the scaphoid, and then my thumbs will go over the dorsal side of the radius. Right? We're going to lean back to produce a little traction, give a little space so we don't bang into the radial styloid. And then my whip is actually through my shoulders, right? So it's here as opposed to this, where I end up in extension and the joint is closed packed anyway. All right, so here, traction, and whip. That sounded pretty good, huh?
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah. So, pretty simple. Now, if I need to do a different joint, a different carpal, lunate on the radius, all I do is I shift my index finger to the lunate, the palmar side of the lunate. Right? If I need to do the triquitrum on the ulnar meniscus, I shift my index finger to the triquitrum, my dorsal finger, my thumbs onto the dorsal side of the meniscus. Lean back, manipulate. Okay? If I need to do a palmar manipulation, all right, so let's say we have a dorsally subluxed trapezoid, which will happen once in a while. That's subluxed dorsally on the capitate. Now my thumbs will go over the back of the trapezoid. My index fingers will go over the palmar surface of the capitate. Right? Traction, manipulate. Right? So my thumbs are pushing palmar, my index fingers pulling dorsal. Right? So it's a relative movement. That's the only thing that changes. The actual technique does not change at all. Any questions about that? Again, when you're setting it up, palmar side here, I'm going to get on her scaphoid. Dorsal side, I'm going to get on the radius, traction, manipulate. That's as simple as it gets, guys. Do that all the way across the hand.
Can you say how it goes from the dorsal direction?
Yeah, so let's say the lunate is dorsal, and we need to push it palmar. So I'm going to get on the dorsal side of the lunate, palmar side of the radius, reinforce, traction, manipulate. Now here's one thing that is kind of a tip, is the lunate can be right underneath that carpal tunnel, right? So there has been some talk about, well, what if I produce a Tinel sign by doing my palpation on the lunate, on the palmar side, etc., that sort of thing. Well, the thing that I found is actually the little Spider-Man thing, having them flex those two fingers will bowstring the tendons into the actual retinaculum over the carpal tunnel, gives us a little space. So basically I would set that up here and say, go ahead and flex those two fingers, now relax, and now I can take up my slack. Gives us a little cushion. Okay. Want to work on setting up a few of those?